The night my boss's daughter followed me home, she was carrying a folder she wasn't supposed to have, and the first thing she said to me wasn't hello. It was, "If I give this to anyone but you, 300 people lose their jobs by Friday." I had known her for exactly 11 days. I didn't even know her middle name, but I knew the look on her face because I'd worn it myself the year my own life fell apart, the look of someone who has just learned something true and is terrified of being the only one holding it. My name is Adrian Vale. I'm 33, and at the time, I was a maintenance and facilities lead at a mid-size furniture manufacturer outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's a fancy title for a man who fixes what breaks. Conveyor belts, ventilation, the loading dock door that jammed every time the temperature dropped below 20. I'd spent 11 years learning the bones of that building better than anyone, including the man who signed my checks. I should explain how I got there, because it matters. I used to be an engineer. A real one, with a degree and a desk, and a future people described using the word promising. Then, my wife and I split quietly. No villains, just two people who'd married the idea of each other and woke up next to strangers. And somewhere in the wreckage of that, I lost my taste for offices. For meetings where everyone performed confidence they didn't have, I took a job with my hands instead, in a factory where the noise was honest and nobody asked me how I was really doing. People thought I'd downgraded. I thought I'd finally stopped pretending. The company was called Hartwell Manufacturing. It had been family-owned for 40 years, and the man who ran it was Gerald Hartwell, 61, silver-haired. The kind of executive who shook your hand with both of his and never quite met your eyes. He remembered everyone's name and nothing about them. He'd walk the floor once a month, clap a worker on the shoulder, and call it leadership. I didn't hate him. I just never trusted a man whose warmth turned off the second the cameras did. His daughter started coming around in October. Her name was Nora Hartwell. She was 31, fresh off some consulting job in Chicago, and her father had brought her in to modernize operations, which everyone on the floor assumed meant she'd recommend firing half of us to buy a robot. I decided to dislike her before she ever spoke a word to me. It was easier that way. People like her clipboard people, efficiency people, they looked at men like me and saw a line item. I was wrong about her. I want to be honest about that, because the whole story turns on it. The first time we actually talked, the main dust collection system had failed in the finishing department, and the air was thick enough to taste. Everyone was standing around waiting for someone to call a contractor and lose half a day's production. I climbed up into the ductwork myself, found the clogged baffle, and was elbow deep in sawdust when a voice below me said, "You're going to throw your back out doing that alone." I looked down. Nora Hartwell was standing there in expensive shoes she clearly regretted, holding the flashlight I'd left on the floor, pointing it up so I could see what I was doing. She didn't have to do that. The clipboard people never did that. "I've got it," I said. "I know you've got it," she said. "I'm holding the light so you don't lose a finger getting it. There's a difference." That stopped me. Most people who outranked me confused having something done for them with helping. She knew the difference. I filed that away without wanting to. When I climbed down, she was studying the old system with a frown that wasn't condescending, it was curious. "How old is this unit?" she asked. "Older than your consulting career." She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, surprised out of her. "Fair," she said. "It's also a fire hazard, and I'm guessing you've told someone that. Twice a year, for 6 years. She went quiet. Something moved across her face, not pity, recognition. Like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected about the place. "Okay," she said. "Adrian, right?" I hadn't told her my name. She'd learned it somewhere, on purpose. "Yeah. Walk me through what else around here you've reported twice a year for 6 years. She pulled out her phone and started taking notes. Real notes, not theater. And against every instinct I had, I walked her through it. That was day 1. By day 4, she'd stopped scheduling our walkthroughs and just started showing up wherever I was working. By day 7, she'd learned to hold a flashlight without being asked, hand me the right wrench before I reached for it, and stand close enough in the cold corners of the building that I noticed she smelled like cedar and something warmer underneath. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way she pushed her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she said my name like it was a complete sentence. The way she'd ask a question and then actually wait for the answer, watching my mouth like the words mattered. I told myself it was nothing. She was the owner's daughter. I was the man who fixed the toilets. There are walls in your mind around certain people, and you don't always notice them until something leans against them. On day 9, the wall got a crack in it. We were up on the mezzanine after hours. I was rerouting a power line. She was supposedly observing, though by then we both knew she just liked being there. The factory was empty and dark below us, the machines sleeping, and the only light was the one work lamp I'd clipped to the railing. She was sitting on an overturned crate with her sleeves pushed up, and she said, out of nowhere, "Can I ask you something that's none of my business? You've been doing that for 9 days. Why are you here?" She wasn't being cruel. "I read your file. You have an engineering degree from a good school. You could be running a plant somewhere, not crawling through the ducts of my father's." I should have given her the easy answer. Instead, maybe because it was dark, maybe because she'd held the flashlight, I gave her the real one. "Because I spent years being good at a life I didn't want," I said. And one day it ended, and I realized I'd never once chosen any of it. Out here, when something breaks, I fix it, and it stays fixed. Nobody asks me to pretend. There's a kind of peace in that people don't understand until they've lost the other kind. She was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me since I got here," she said finally. And then, softer, "Most people lie to me because of my last name. You don't. I didn't know you well enough to lie to you yet." She smiled, but her eyes had gone bright in a way the work lamp couldn't fully explain. "Don't start now," she said. And the air between us got thin enough that I had to look back at the power line to keep myself from saying something I couldn't take back. That was day 9. Day 11 was the night she followed me home. It had been a strange day from the start. Gerald Hartwell had spent the afternoon locked in his office with 2 men in suits. I didn't recognize sharp suits, out-of-town suits, the kind that don't come to a factory to admire the craftsmanship. Nora hadn't done a single walkthrough. I'd seen her once, crossing the lot near lunch, and she hadn't looked at me. She'd looked through me, pale, her jaw set in a way I'd never seen. Something was wrong. I told myself it wasn't mine to ask about. I clocked out at 9. The first snow of the season had started, not heavy, just the fine, hissing kind that means business is coming. My truck took 3 tries to turn over. I drove the 20 minutes home to my little rented house at the edge of town, the one with the porch I'd rebuilt myself and the dog I kept meaning to adopt, and I noticed headlights behind me about halfway there. I didn't think much of it. Country roads, one way out of the industrial park. But the headlights followed me off the highway, followed me down my road, followed me into my own gravel driveway and stopped. I got out slow, the cold biting through my jacket, every instinct from 11 years of locking up a building alone at night, going quiet and sharp. Then the driver's door opened, and Nora Hartwell stepped out into my headlights with a manila folder clutched against her chest like it was the only warm thing she had left. "Nora, if I give this to anyone but you," she said, her voice shaking, 300 people lose their jobs by Friday." I stood there in the falling snow, completely lost. "What are you talking about?" "My father's selling the company." The words came out fast now, like she'd been holding them in her throat for hours. "Not selling, liquidating. Those men today, they're not buyers, Adrian. They're an asset-stripping firm. They buy companies like ours, sell off the equipment and the real estate, dump the pension obligations, and walk away. Everyone on that floor thinks they're getting modernized." Her laugh broke in half. "I was brought in to modernize them right out of a paycheck and not realize what I was doing until it was done. The cold didn't matter anymore. How do you know this?" She held up the folder. "Because I found this in his files while I was building the operations report he asked me for. The whole timeline. The severance, they're not planning to pay. The pension fund they've already started moving against." Her eyes filled. "My father knew. He's known for 2 months. And he had me in there laughing with those men this afternoon like we were all on the same team." "Get inside," I said. "You're shaking. I shouldn't even be here. I don't know why I—" She stopped. The snow caught in her dark hair. "I do know why. You're the only person at that entire company I trust to do the right thing with this. I've watched you for 11 days. You report the same fire hazard twice a year, knowing nobody listens. You fix things that aren't your job. You told me the truth in a dark factory when you had no reason to." Her voice dropped. "I needed to give this to someone who wouldn't just protect himself. And you were the only name on the list. There are moments that split your life into before and after. I felt this one happen. Not because of the romance of it, because of the trust." She'd driven through the first snow of winter to the house of a man she'd known 11 days, carrying the one thing that could blow up her own family, because she'd decided I was honest. That's a heavier thing to hand someone than affection. I unlocked my door and let her in. Inside, I lit the wood stove and made coffee, because that's what my hands knew how to do when the world got complicated. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands around the mug, the folder between us like evidence, and I read it under the bad overhead light while the snow tapped the windows. It was worse than she'd described, everything she'd said, plus a paper trail showing it had been engineered to look like Nora's recommendations. If this went the way her father planned, when the workers lost everything, the documents would point at the daughter who'd been brought in to modernize. She wasn't just witnessing the betrayal. She was the designated scapegoat for it. I set the folder down. He's going to blame you. She nodded slowly, like saying it out loud would make it more real than she could survive. I figured that out around 6 o'clock tonight. That's when I stopped being able to breathe. She looked at me. He's my father, Adrian. He held my hand at my mother's funeral. He paid for my education. And he was going to let 300 people and his own daughter take the fall so he could clear 40 years of debt and retire to Arizona. I didn't say anything. There's a specific pain in the distance between what someone is capable of and what they choose. And it's worse when the person is someone you love. She wasn't angry at her father. She was heartbroken by him. I knew the difference, and I let her sit in it without rushing her out. "What do we do?" she asked. I noticed the we. So did she. "We can't move on this tonight," I said. "If you confront him, he denies it and shreds everything by morning. If we go public without the full chain of documents authenticated, he calls it a disgruntled daughter's revenge and buries you." I tapped the folder. "This is real, but it's not enough yet. We need the pension transfers in writing, and we need them before Friday's signing." "And how do we get those?" I almost smiled. I've had keys to every part of that building for 11 years, including the records room nobody's updated the lock on since the Bush administration, and you have a legitimate reason to be in your father's files. I leaned back. "He thinks you're on his side. That's the only advantage we've got. Don't waste it by letting him see your face crack." She stared at me for a long moment. "You're terrifyingly good at this for a man who fixes ventilation. I told you. I used to be an engineer. We're just plumbers with anxiety." That pulled a real laugh out of her, wet and surprised, and the tension in her shoulders dropped half an inch. It was the first time all night she'd looked less like a woman bracing against a door and more like one who'd been told she could stop pushing. She stayed late. We didn't plan it, we just kept talking, building the thing piece by piece, and at some point, the conversation drifted off the company and onto everything else. She told me about her mother, who'd run the design side of Hartwell before she died, and who'd believed the company was a promise to the people who built it, not a number on a sheet. She told me she'd taken the consulting job in Chicago to get away from her father's shadow and had come back because some part of her still wanted his approval, and how ashamed that made her now. I told her things I hadn't told anyone since the divorce about the year I stopped answering my phone, about how peace and loneliness can wear the same coat. Around midnight, she said, "I should go. The roads." Neither of us moved. "The roads are worse now than an hour ago," I said, "and you're exhausted, and you're going to need to walk into that building tomorrow looking like nothing happened." I stood. "Take the spare room. I'll dig your car out in the morning before anyone's awake." She looked up at me, and there it was again, that thin air, that crack in the wall. "Adrian," she said carefully, "I'm not. I came here because I trust you. I don't want you to think—" "I know exactly why you came here," I said. "And it isn't this." I gestured vaguely at the space between us, the warmth of it. "This is just a thing that's true at the same time. It can wait. It's not going anywhere." She was quiet. Then she said, almost to herself, "That might be the kindest thing a man has ever said to me," and went to the spare room before either of us could be braver than the night called for. I sat by the stove a long time after, not reading, just listening to the snow and the unfamiliar sound of someone else breathing in my house. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. We built it carefully. Nora went into work each morning and performed loyalty for her father so convincingly it scared me, laughing at his jokes, nodding along in meetings, asking the asset strippers helpful questions while her hands shook under the table. Each evening she'd come to my house, and we'd add another piece. I got into the records room on the second night and photographed the pension transfer authorizations, her father's signature, the dates, all of it. She pulled the email chain from the shared drive she still had access to. Piece by piece, the chain of proof closed. And somewhere in those 3 days, the other thing closed too. It happened on the second night. We'd just confirmed we had everything we needed, and the relief of it hit us both at once. This giddy, exhausted, we might actually do this relief. She was standing at my counter, and I came around to set the laptop down, and we ended up closer than the kitchen required. She didn't step back. Neither did I. "We're really doing this," she said quietly. "We're going to blow up my whole family to save 300 strangers." "They're not strangers to me," I said. "I know all their names. Gerald never could." Something broke open in her face. "That's the difference between you and every man I've ever dated," she said. "You actually see people." "I see you," I said, before I could decide whether I should. The air went still. Her eyes dropped to my mouth and came back up, and she said, "Adrian, if I kiss you right now, is that going to make all of this more complicated?" "Almost certainly." "Good," she whispered. "I'm tired of doing the sensible thing." She kissed me. Not the desperate kind. Not the kind you can blame on adrenaline or fear. The deliberate kind. The kind that's a decision. Her hand came up to the side of my neck, and mine found her waist. And for one long moment, there was no company, no father, no folder on the table, just her, warm and certain, choosing this in the middle of the worst week of her life. When we pulled apart, she kept her forehead against mine and laughed, shaky and real. "That was a terrible idea," she said. "The worst," I agreed. "Do you regret it?" "Ask me Friday," she said. "If we're not both unemployed and disowned, I'll do it again." "And if we are?" She pulled back just enough to look at me, and her eyes were bright but steady. "Then I'll have lost a company and a father in the same week," she said. "And I'll still think you were the best thing I found in that whole place." She touched my jaw. "I didn't come here to fall for you, Adrian. I came here to do the right thing." Turns out, they were the same direction. I didn't sleep much that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping. Friday came. The signing was set for 2 in the afternoon, in the big conference room on the second floor, the asset strippers and their lawyers flying in to close. Nora and I had planned it down to the minute. She'd be in the room. I'd be downstairs with the full, authenticated package already in the hands of 2 people Gerald couldn't control. A labor attorney Nora had quietly retained in Chicago, and a reporter from the regional business paper who'd been investigating the firm doing the buying for months and who'd nearly wept when we handed her the proof. But plans break. That's the one thing 11 years of maintenance teaches you. At 1 o'clock, Gerald Hartwell called me into his office. I went, because not going would have been more suspicious than going. He was alone, standing at his window overlooking the floor full of people who didn't know that in an hour their lives were supposed to end. He didn't turn around. "Adrian," he said, 11 years. You know this building better than I do." He finally turned, and his face wasn't warm now. The warmth was off, the camera's gone. "My daughter's been spending a great deal of time with you. She's been learning the operations." He studied me. "She's a romantic, like her mother. She thinks a company is a family." He smiled thinly. "It isn't. It's an asset. And sentimental people make expensive mistakes." He let that sit. "Whatever she's told you, whatever you think you've seen a smart man with 11 years of seniority and a pension of his own to protect would forget it. I can make sure you're the one person who comes out of the next phase better than he went in. Or I can make sure you don't come out at all. I can." There it was, the crack under the polish. The threat dressed as an offer. I'd spent a year of my life letting people decide what I was worth. I'd rebuilt myself out here precisely so that would never happen again. "Mr. Hartwell," I said, "I report the same fire hazard twice a year knowing nobody listens. You know why I keep doing it?" I let him wait. "Because the 1 year I stop is the year it burns. I'm not built to look away from a thing I can see." I held his eyes. "Your daughter knew that about me before I did. That's why she trusted me. And that's the one thing in all of this you never understood about either of us." His face changed. He understood then that he'd already lost, that the offer had been made to a man who couldn't take it, by a man who'd badly misjudged both the daughter and the help. He reached for his phone. He was too late. At 1:15, the labor attorney walked into the conference room upstairs and set the full package in front of the asset strippers' lawyers, the pension transfers, the fraud timeline, the engineered paper trail, and a copy already filed with the state. At 1:20, the reporter's first call went out. By 1:30, The men in the sharp suits were on their phones to their own counsel, and the deal that was supposed to quietly erase 300 people was the most dangerous thing in the building to be standing near. And Nora, walked out of that conference room, crossed the floor in full view of everyone, came down the stairs, and stood next to me, not behind me, not in front of me. Next to me, in front of her father and every worker who'd stopped their machines to watch, she took my hand. Gerald stared at our hands like they were a language he'd never learned. "You don't get to sell people," she said to him, and her voice didn't shake at all now. "Mom would have rather burned the company down than do what you tried to do. So would I. And I just made sure you can't." It didn't end like a movie. Real things rarely do. There were lawyers for months. The asset strip deal collapsed, but Hartwell Manufacturing didn't come out unscarred. There was debt, there was reckoning, there was a long, ugly stretch where nobody knew if the place would survive at all. Gerald didn't go to prison. Men like him almost never do. But he lost the company, which to him was worse, and he lost his daughter's pretense that she didn't see him clearly, which I think hurt him more than he expected. What survived was the factory. A group of the senior workers, with the labor attorney's help and a credit union that believed in the numbers, bought it. 300 jobs stayed 300 jobs. They asked me to run operations, the real version of the title I'd been carrying for 11 years. I said yes, not because I needed a desk again, but because this time I'd chosen it. And Nora stayed. Our first real date happened a month after the snow, after the worst of the legal storm had passed. I took her to a diner with bad coffee and good pie because I refused to be the kind of man who only knows how to be honest in a crisis. She wore the cedar perfume. We talked for 3 hours, and in the parking lot under a flickering light she said, "I'm still a little terrified of all of it." "Me too," I said. "Good," she said, smiling. "Then neither of us is being reckless alone." A year later, she moved into the little house with the rebuilt porch, and we finally adopted the dog I'd kept meaning to adopt. She redesigned the whole finishing department's airflow herself, and the first thing she did was rip out the old dust system I'd reported for 6 years. She said it was symbolic. I said it was just a fire hazard. She said it could be both. People still ask how we met. Nora tells them, "He was the only honest man in the building." I tell them, "She followed me home in a snowstorm with a folder that could have ruined her own family, and handed it to me because she'd decided I was someone who wouldn't look away." Both are true. Neither is the whole of it. The whole of it is that I'd spent years believing the safe, quiet, invisible version of me was all I had left to offer anyone. And a woman I'd known 11 days drove through the first snow of winter to prove I was wrong, that being the man who can't look away from a thing he sees isn't a smaller life. It's the only one worth choosing. So let me ask you, what would you have done if your boss's daughter followed you home with a secret that could destroy 300 lives and trusted you, a near stranger, to carry it because you were the only honest person she knew? Would you have taken the safe offer? Or risked everything for people whose names you knew? And have you ever had someone see the real you before you'd even shown it to them? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.